Allo, Test.
We will be starting shortly with our event co-hosted by the government of Dominica and University of Zurich. So I would invite all panelists to join the panel and all who don't want to attend the side event to leave the room. So, panelists, please join me. Colleagues, could you please join me on the panel?
One needs to literally bite into the mic, otherwise the people won't understand you. The room is complete crap. This I've never seen such bad quality rooms in any of these conferences. So one needs to really bear with it. But
No problem.
So, colleagues, please join the panel.
No, we don't have time. We don't.
Oh, fabulous.
gut. Das ist alle. Good evening, colleagues and friends. I would like to start the side event, which is co-hosted by the government of Dominica and the University of Zurich. My name is Axel Michaelova. I'm senior researcher at the University of Zurich, leading the research group on international climate policy. So this event is aiming at discussing capacity building challenges for small island developing states. Dominica, of course, is a small state in the Eastern Caribbean. We have seen in the past that the small island developing states have largely been bypassed by the clean development mechanism. This slide shows a few examples of activities, but compared to the rest of the world, it's minuscule. And the event wants now to discuss how capacity building in small island developing states involving both North-South and South-South collaboration, simplification of baseline and monitoring methodologies, as well as blending of finance can remedy the situation in the context of Article 6. And of course, Dominica is a very special case. We will hear from our representatives on the panel today. So, of course, South-South collaboration in the past has not been very much engaged in, but now in the context of Article 6, we see the first emergence of regional alliances that try to spread capacity. We've seen the first ones in West and East Africa, and hopefully we'll see the emergence of such an alliance also in the Caribbean. I also would like to put the emphasis on the blending of finance streams. We'll hear from various stakeholders in Dominica how blending of finance is being undertaken. I just here show a graph that I like using in my academic publications, integrating of climate finance with international carbon markets. So far, unfortunately, this had not happened. I sincerely hope that in the context of Article 6, that will increasingly happen. So our event today will start with a section that focuses on the experiences in Dominica and innovative approaches that are being undertaken there. And the second part will look into the South-South capacity building aspects and an international initiative for development of Article 6 methodology tools that, okay, now we have a challenge here. Can we bring back the slides, please? Well, let's hope that the technology works as good as in the past. Yeah, thank you very much. So without further ado, I would now like to invite Honorable Francis Baron, CEO of the Climate Resilient Executing Agency of Dominica,
to start our Dominican partners part of the side event, and then I of course invite later Raquel Moses to animate the panel discussion. So Francine, you have the floor.
Good evening. Thank you. Sorry. No. Hello, good evening. Thank you, Axel, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of this discussion today. And we all have ambitious commitments under our NDCs. And in Dominica's case, we have the vision to become the first climate resilient country by 2030. Now, despite being the region of the lowest emitters, we all want to meet net zero targets and transition to 100% renewables. Dominica's goal is to generate 100% of our power from renewables by 2030. The challenge that we face, however, is how do we fund that transition? In the Caribbean, we have had to deal with successive climate disasters which have worsened in recent years. In 2015 and 2017, tropical storms caused loss and damage in Dominica of 90% of GDP and 226% of GDP, respectively. And responding to such disasters inevitably results in countries incurring high debt, which further limits our ability to access or to mobilize finance to deal not only with everyday needs, but also to meet our NDC and adaptation commitments and goals. Now, we all know the challenge of accessing climate finance to fund the important imperatives of mitigation and adaptation. And it is not always possible to have accessible, affordable finance as quickly as we need it. So we must be innovative in our approaches to raise the funding that we need to enable our resilient transformation. And what Article 6 of the Paris Agreement enables is the unlocking of resources to support our efforts towards a low-carbon resilient economy and to enable us to pursue more sustainable development projects. So we were fortunate to have concluded a bilateral agreement under Article 6 with Switzerland at COP26 in Glasgow last year. And this really allows for mutual collaboration in decarbonization while simultaneously supporting sustainable development goals and the transition to a low-carbon, climate-resilient economy. With the support of the CLIC Foundation, it makes possible critical project de-risking, activity, feasibility, marketability, and bankable analysis. That really paves the way for the crowding in of private capital over a portfolio of projects. We're really excited to be part of the conversation this evening as we really think that it provides an important avenue for mobilization of much needed resources to further our climate resilience efforts. We have to really look at numerous and multiple sources of finance if we are to meet our climate resilience ambitions. We want to transform Dominica into a resilient nation, and that requires us to look at resilience generally, looking at our social, economic, environment, and infrastructure resilience. And that really requires us to mobilize significant resources. And so we must bring all different funding sources to the table, and that includes looking at how Article 6 of the Paris Agreement can help us to address some of the challenges that we face and to mobilize some of the resources that we need to mobilize in order to make those changes. So I look forward to the discussions this evening. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. And so now I will moderate a panel discussion on the implementation of Article 6. You just heard from Francine Barron, CEO of Climate Resilient Agency of Dominica, CREED. There is Ramiro Tabares of RAO Partners. He's joining online. Ms. Fenella Owen. Okay, wonderful. Deputy Director of the Global Green Growth Institute. Fenella heads GGGI's Carbon Pricing Global Practice. As the Deputy Director, she is a carbon market expert with extensive experience as both a buyer and a structurer of carbon transactions. Ms. Alicia Montalvo, Climate Action and Positive. Martha Castillo for Alicia from CAF. And that's it. Yes, great. All right. So we'll start by asking each of you. Thank you. All right. All right, so Ramiro is going to join us first and do a slide presentation on the National Financing Vehicle. So can we have that?
Apparently we have slight technical questions. I've been now in the third event in this room, so we have to hope that we can manage quickly.
We're still having a little bit of an issue with the sound, but I'm not sure if you can hear me. If you can hear me, I'll go ahead.
Now
and
we
get
hear
right
you
on.
perfectly.
And you can confirm this by the Teams chat. Very good. Now I see that everyone can hear me, and thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to present to you the work that we've done so far with the government of Dominica. This is part of a project that is funded by the Green Climate Fund and as the Green Growth Institute, or the Global Green Growth Institute, as the delivery partner. And we've been working on this project, our firm, along with two other firms, over the last 9 months, with the purpose being of establishing establishing a national financing vehicle for Dominica. And this is actually a very novel instrument, especially for small island developing states, given that it's based on really high country ownership and very grassroots investment types for investments of this type, right? So let's get on it. So one of the things that when we were designing this project that we saw, and I think most of you probably would know, is that SIDS do require a different approach in mobilizing private capital, right? Certainly most of us would think, when we think about mobilizing private capital, we think about very large investments. And when we think about SIDS, investments tend to be very varied. Obviously, you would have those very large investments, but also, and mostly, you have to unlock capital at a very micro level, which are the fundamentals, of course, for most of the income generation within the countries, right? So this project was really designed to unlock private capital from a grassroots market-based approach. The reason for this is because we have to ensure that investments are sustainable over time, right? And one of the ways that we ensure this is that people have skin in the game. And there is no better way of ensuring sustainability that people are risk averse to lose, obviously, their livelihoods. And in this case, what we seek to do is promote this at a level that ensure that especially micro businesses can grow and prosper in a low carbon economy, right? As I said earlier, micro business constitute most of the employment and income generation in the Caribbean, so this is a sector that must be addressed. And small improvements in productivity can yield very high outputs. So with this, setting the stage in place, we took a look at all the main sectors of the economy, and we took a look at what are the barriers of investments, and we thought about what would a type of impact fund, what would an impact fund provide solutions to the key drivers for limiting growth. In this case, for example, high energy costs, educational limitations, and limited access to capital. So that sets the stage for the type of investment vehicle that we are proposing and that we have designed. So the national finance vehicle is it's a private impact investment fund. For those of you who may not be aware of what a private impact investment fund, these are specific structures within the private equity or venture capital space that have been very important for the growth on financial services over the last few years. And utilizing these instruments that have very strong governance allow for unlocking a lot of the capital that otherwise may be very difficult to achieve from, let's say, for example, a top-down traditional approach, right? So this fund has been structured in a way that different types of investors can contribute as limited partners to different sub-funds. Each sub-fund has a different, let's say, investment thesis or fund expected results, as you can see on the screen. The reason why we did this is because when we were posed with the challenge of developing this instrument, we had a list of things that we needed to accomplish. We needed to provide, for example, concessional loans to promote micro businesses, as I said earlier, but we also had to provide funding, commercial funding for very large investments that the government seeks to do, right? And in this case, the only way to accommodate those types of investors was to develop 3 different funds that would be managed under a single general partner, right? This also correlates to the fact that different financial instruments would have to be available for these kinds of investments. And of course, very large investments can be funded through equity and through commercial loans in the private markets, while micro investments, for example, in improvements in fishery productivity and in marine ecosystems would most likely require concessional type of instruments. What we were designing this, we were presented by also a list of projects by the government of Dominica that they would wish to undertake. Some of these projects were included within their GCF country program. We certainly analyzed that, and we wanted to provide some background, at least in the terms of financial structure and how these things could be financed, right? So in that sense, Dominica is bound by some very interesting attributes. For example, it has a profound, proven geothermal resource. This allows for the country to explore opportunities that are very high energy intensive, such as green hydrogen and green hydrogen derivatives, such as green ammonia. There's also a huge potential for port infrastructure that is right now very dispersed throughout the country and certainly need investment on that side. The country is right-sized for EV adoption, given its topography and its geography. This allows the country has the size for almost any of the current EV available in the markets to be able to be used with perhaps not that many charging stations, and some work has been done on a concept note by the government with other donors, right? In terms of commitments to a blue economy, the fund and the projects that we've reviewed really do seek to improve, to make very small improvements in agriculture, obviously within the bounds of some other very renowned international actors such as FAO that have been leading this at a field level. Small investments in agriculture yield very high productivity, especially when we're talking about a country like Dominica, as I'm sure Ms. Barron explained earlier, has certainly the drive and the willingness to go towards a low carbon economy, and we certainly applaud that, right? And finally, one of the things that we took a look at that would be that we think it's essential for sustainability is having a very strong educational base that is obviously market driven for those people that would be employed in the new economy or in the low carbon economy would be able to find highly productive jobs that are related to improving the country, especially in climate change initiatives like climate smart agriculture and things of that nature. This fund really seeks to underpin those activities and leverage the private element for that, so that those activities can grow and harness over time, right? One of the key components, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier before I started the conversation, is the great importance of having independence and governance of these funds. We've built several safeguards within the structure of the fund in its operational manual and governance framework that allow for two levels of oversight, right? So most impact investment funds have an advisory committee and an investment committee that makes the decisions. We've added an extra layer, especially noting that some of these projects, smaller projects, can have several activities and several components that are more development focused rather than strictly commercially focused. And this has been designed the way so that there is enough ownership in those decisions that are made in the smaller projects to be done with participation from the government and not just the privately focused investors, right? Continuing on to the operation, which correlates to what I've just said, since we have to have two elements, a commercial element and let's say a concessional element, the fund has to operate under a different type of mandate that you would see in an impact fund. So we have an investor-centric mandate, and we also have a donor approach. And since donors like to see, are more interested in the impact of their investments, we have developed a framework for that. And investors obviously like to see a return. This fund has to bridge that gap, right? And we've done so obviously with the governance and also with a strong operational manual, right? So essentially two types of projects can be funded through the NFB. Some of the projects, as I said earlier, for example, highly development-centric projects, which I'm sure all of you may be aware, that are relied upon having procurement of experts, having separate activities, are going to be managed through a GP-appointed project management unit, while other projects that are more commercially viable, such, for example, energy or port infrastructure, where EPC contractors and sponsors really do lead the way, would be administered. The GP is the centralized reporting mechanism for all the reports and measurements that would happen and monitoring of the entire portfolio of projects that would be under the NFB. Lastly, we think that this is a fundamental element for SIDS and for Dominica for implementation of Article 6. We don't know yet, and I think some of the other colleagues in the panel are going to discuss this at a more profound level, what the mechanisms will be in terms of offsets at this time. But this NFB has been designed so that within its governance structure that I highlighted briefly earlier, will be very apt to coordinate the verification and certification of these likely to be instruments, right? So the sectors that the fund can invest on, and not to drag this on a little bit longer, I think I expanded this. Obviously, we're very much interested in energy, transport, building resilience. We're certainly very much interested in marine ecosystems, and obviously livelihoods, right, amongst others, right? What we're looking for, right? So in difference of this fund, and I have to make this clarification, this is not a government-sponsored fund. That is, the government will not put cash or any assets as we might have seen in other structures, such as, for example, the Bahamas. This is a fund that's strictly private-led and donor-funded, investor and donor-funded. So for this to happen and for this structure to work, the fund really does need a GP that is apt to the task, right? And it's a GP that has to have some experience, or at least, let's say, vast experience of working on development projects and on commercial projects, and also LPs. Obviously would go through a fundraising process, right? Of qualified investors that are looking for long-term returns. And when I mean by LPs, this also includes, for example, donors or potential donors, such as the usual suspects, such as the GCF. If you are interested in talking to us a little more about this, and I think Michael might be in the audience, Michael Savarin, who's been instrumental in getting this project moving, has been a very driven person, and I think if you get a chance to speak with him, you'll see his enthusiasm. We also have a little webpage that we've developed for this, and you can contact us. We have an email right over here, and certainly looking forward to hearing from you and getting the NFB moving towards the next stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ramiro. And just since Michael was mentioned, Michael, can you please put your hand up so that we know who Michael Savarin is? So that if you have any interest in the Dominica NFV. All right, so we're going to start off with the panel. I'm going to start with you, Francine. So a lot of people, I mean, especially considering what Dominica has been through in terms of storms, etc., you know, you would have a vested interest in making sure that the carbon market, Article 6 implementation, isn't a race to do nothing, that it actually results in action taking place towards decarbonization. So what do you say to people who are critical of Article 6 and believe that it stops us from doing what we know we need to do?
Thank you, Raquel. And I think perhaps quite the opposite. And I guess in Dominica's case, we have a clear plan in relation to what we want to achieve. We've developed our climate resilience recovery plan, and there are a number of initiatives under that plan that we want to achieve by 2030. So we have, we just heard Ramiro talk about the National Financing Vehicle. We're looking at a number of different avenues for us to be able to achieve what we think is a very ambitious program that we want to get to by 2030. And so the Article 6 provides just one avenue for us to be able to achieve that. There are a number of different areas that we are looking at that will support the achievement of some of our goals. We're looking at a low carbon transport initiative that will see us transitioning to the use of greater electric vehicles, and that is one project that can be used under the Article 6 structure to galvanize additional funding. For us, the transition to 100% renewable energy by 2030 is another of our goals, and the actions that we will be taking in order to achieve that also provides this other avenue that lends itself to Article 6 cooperation. So really and truly, if our countries who want to take advantage of this have in place concrete plans, and we should all have those plans because we all have committed in our NDCs to taking certain action that will result in us reducing our carbon footprint, taking action that can lend itself to us achieving our net zero objectives. So it does provide a structure that we can take advantage of. Ramiro would have given a whole list of different areas that Dominica is focusing on. We're looking at our adaptation. We're looking at our blue economy. We're looking at mitigation impacts, and we're looking at all of these things in a very holistic way. We're looking at a number of initiatives that would help get us to the achievement of our 20 targets that we want to achieve by 2030. And I think a lot of those targets lends itself to cooperation under Article 6. So I would say, in answer to your question, that I think although there's some work that remains to be done in relation to the full implementation of Article 6, it certainly lends itself to supporting the work of small island states like Dominica, who have to look at innovative ways of financing the transition that we want to make. Thank you.
Definitely. I agree that it supports the innovative use of finance to close gaps that otherwise can't be closed. So, Fenella, there have been complaints about, from the Global South especially, about the price of carbon, that it doesn't really take into consideration, as a carbon pricing expert, that it doesn't really take into consideration the true cost of the carbon in the atmosphere, but also that the Global South especially doesn't have enough say in how that pricing, the price that they're able to attract. What are your thoughts around that, and how can we get around it?
Sure, and thank you for the question, and thank you very much to the organisers for inviting me to be part of this panel. Maybe a little bit of context as to what authority do we have to speak on this. GGGI, for those in the audience who are not familiar with us, we are an international organisation that works on a membership basis, helping and supporting our member governments to a pathway of green growth. The OECS is a member of GGGI, and through that we are the implementing partner through our local team who are based in St. Lucia, and I see our country representative, Kristin, online watching the session. We are implementing GCF readiness funding, which is under which we have appointed Ramiro to help put together the idea of an NFE. And actually, it casts my mind back because shortly before I started working in carbon pricing, I actually wrote a paper on the lessons we learned from NFEs that we have designed as GGGI around the world, and it's available still. I just checked earlier. It's available on our website. We did that in 2019. I don't think the problems have changed, and yes, your question is very relevant in the sense of if you have an NFE and then you're trying to say, okay, we want to put carbon trading in with the mitigation or the blue carbon streams of the fund, because sadly adaptation doesn't actually in itself often doesn't reduce mitigation. Does it reflect the cost of implementation, really, is probably the nearer question. And the answer is you've got to understand it's a market. So markets have prices. I sat in a dealing room for 20 years in a commercial bank, in an investment bank in London, trading carbon, trading oil. There's one price for everyone. The economic view of what we're trying to achieve is finding a single price for carbon globally. We've not got that at the moment. So what we're trying to do is where it's too expensive to mitigate, we're trying to find cheaper places to mitigate. So the problem is that then if you turn that question round and everyone says you're not paying enough, well, there's a point that it's, okay, then it's not worthwhile buying that carbon because it's too expensive. So what we should be doing is instead mitigating more within Sweden or Switzerland or Norway. So we have to find a balance. And a balance is the balance not only on price, but on the creation of markets. And I was just speaking earlier this afternoon about the creation that we've done in answer to a survey that we held on what was the problem and what were the issues with Article 6. And a lot of people said we want to, a lot of sellers, we want to be part of the market, but we don't understand it, and we think everything's dictated by the buyers. So we said, okay, fine, we'll create something, and what we created is an umbrella platform for all of our work under Article 6, where buyers and sellers, the design is buyers and sellers come together in a more equitable fashion. So rather than contract is handed, done, it is a negotiation, and we're trying to create new markets. So we are often trading at this very immature end of the market, in the very early stage, which is a different stage from other buyers in the market. We're at how do we get blue carbon to work? How do we get carbon trading for SIDS to work? So yes, sometimes that needs to be initially supported a lot on the technical assistance by grants, but then at some point we need to make the projects viable enough that they can stand up on their own, because we can make them premium, we can make them so beautifully environmentally integral and have such brilliant co-benefits, which small-scale, micro-scale businesses have, which is fantastic. So I think they definitely get a premium. But I think to try and say, well, we don't think we're getting paid enough, the price needs to be higher, is going to be hard to try and push. We need to find an equilibrium where buyers and sellers can agree together. Otherwise, there are others in the world that will sell or buy to try and find that price. Thanks.
All right. All right, thank you so much. And Martha, so, CAF is well known across the region for being very, very swift to operate and to implement and to facilitate catalytic capital. The challenge is that Article 6 isn't fully implemented yet. How are you operating differently with that in mind, and how are you moving towards readiness for full Article 6 implementation?
Thanks for the invitation, and the apologies from Alicia, because she's now attending another event, and it was not possible to be here. In terms of what we are doing in terms of for the Article 6, we are only starting with some readiness and some technical cooperation in some of the countries, just to try to help and to understand what is going to happen and the opportunities. But as you said before, this is part of the avenue in terms of the new funds and the new flow, the fresh funds, in order to attend the real challenge of the region in terms of the adaptation. As you said, that there's tons of needs around the region, and the impacts, especially in the islands. So that we are doing right now is starting with the implementation of some technical cooperations in some of the countries with the willingness to participate in the mechanism. And of course, there are many lessons coming from the stage of the CDM and what is going to happen in terms of the Article 6. So that's that we are trying to do right now in terms to facilitate the implementation or the learning of the countries in the region.
Good. Thank you very much, Rachel and colleagues, for this fascinating insight into the financing landscape of a very small country like Dominica. I was really thrilled to see the innovative approaches that are taking place there. I mentioned initially this integration of climate finance, and I'm seeing that it's actually materializing in Dominica. I'm really looking forward to seeing the fruits that it will carry. With that, I would ask Ursula to take the floor for the intervention from Click Foundation.
Great. Thank you very much, Axel, for the invitation and for the interesting panel discussion that really framed and the presentation of the Dominican National Finance Vehicle that really set the stage, I think, for the following inputs and discussion really neatly. I'd like to share with you a little bit about the work we actually do with Dominica and also some of the lessons learned from our work also with other countries on Article 6 readiness and success factors. So just to give you a very brief background, the Click Foundation is the Swiss agency procured with the purchase of ITMOs for the international pledges in the Swiss NDC. And we work with partner countries that have signed a cooperation agreement on Article 6.2 cooperation with Switzerland. And you can actually here see that in that slide, there's a political layer on, can you see that? All right, not there, okay. So there's a political layer where both the Switzerland and the host countries have this bilateral agreement in place that really sets is an umbrella agreement. It sets the rules, the procedures, and some important process steps, such as, of course, in human rights, contribution to sustainable development, further also the corresponding adjustments that, of course, need to happen between the seller country and the buyer country. Underneath, you see the commercial level, where we as a compliance buyer engage with program developers and program owners on the purchase of the emission reductions. And you also can see these two pillars, the national frameworks, both in the host country and Switzerland. Okay, something is happening in the background. I hope you can still see my presentation. So important to take away here. We sign a off-take agreement with program owners. What we provide is results-based finance. That means we pay upon the delivery of the emission reductions. And there is certainly a role also here for climate finance. For example, to develop the pipeline, to do the more climate resilient aspect, perhaps, of an intervention. So in the case with Dominica, where we cooperate, we have an e-mobility program under development. This is already relatively far advanced, where we actually do cooperate with climate finance. So the GCF is doing really important groundwork, support of the low carbon transport roadmap and the stakeholder consultations involved, also the resilient infrastructure, so the adaptation and resilient aspect of e-mobility and renewable energy generation. So this can be really an important and interesting case for division of work between carbon finance and climate finance. What you can see here is the partner countries we are working with. On the right-hand side, actually Morocco has already signed its bilateral agreement with Switzerland, so that is should move up the list, and the two others that you can see will also follow soon in the next few days, hopefully. But just to give you a bit of a background, this is how we work. And Dominica, of course, is on top of the list, as you can see in the upper left, and one of our trusted partners since last COP. On the left-hand side, you see the requirements. And as Francine touched upon earlier, of course, these Article 6 programs, they should ultimately raise ambition and lead to more emission reductions and not just replace a problem from one place to another. So that is a really important aspect. So what we support should go beyond the unconditional NDC targets of the country. Is very important. Also, we have a few requirements beyond the rules set in the bilateral agreement, few additional requirements that come from the Swiss national framework. So, for example, we are not engaging in biological sequestration or afforestation or reforestation. We don't do large-scale hydro or need to be careful with fossil fuel lock-in. Just a few examples. And then additional requirements that we have as a buyer, we are looking for relatively mature approaches. We're looking for self-sustainability in the long run. So we are looking for programs that need this carbon finance to really just get off the ground, that need an additional revenue stream for the next few years until the end of our crediting period that ends in 2030 and then will run by itself by producing sustainable revenue streams such as green energy or other low carbon products or services. Then really important also as well, the programs need to be financially additional, and there shall be no double counting. And this is where we have to be careful with climate finance, because of course we need to make sure that what we support is really then transferred from the host country to Switzerland and not counted for twice. So we need to be careful with official development assistance, for example, and climate finance, where of course also some reporting is happening. So and one way around perhaps is, again, as mentioned, that climate finance engages in those activities where the attribution gap is a little wider than with carbon finance. With carbon finance, we really need to make sure that there's a very clear causality between the money and the emission reductions. With climate finance, perhaps there's a little more leeway, so also being able to do resilient infrastructure, TA, really the groundwork, the support, the enabling environment, all of the things, the pipeline development, all of the things that we need ultimately as well for the successful Article 6 program execution. So what we are trying to achieve, we want to engage the host countries' business sector to make investments in green technology. We offer support for the development of a program, and we offer also support in matchmaking and finding investors and financial partners. And we offer a long-term offtake contract until 2030. Here you can see in our climate action wheel the different steps that a program undergoes and the financial commitments that we offer. So first, a program idea is first a program proponent registers with us, then once registered, has access to the portal and can submit an idea. We evaluate the idea, we give feedback, we have feedback calls. Then once all the main questions are resolved, we actually engage in the first funding. We financially support the development of the program. The program then is being developed over the course of several months. Once it is ready with all the documentation package that comes with it, it undergoes third-party validation, and then it needs to be presented to both the host country and Switzerland first it becomes validated, and then it is presented to both the host country and Switzerland for authorization. Then it can go into implementation. And this is when our main financial commitment actually kicks in. Then when we sign the offtake agreement, where we commit to purchasing the emission reductions for a given price until 2030 or the end of 2030 with the program owner. So these are basically the modalities of our support, what you can see here. And because these type of programs, they come with these requirements attached, and a lot of course, preparatory work is needed, we can see several readiness needs and capacity gaps in both the public and the private sector still. So for example, there are definitely need to look into interlinkages between Article 6 and NDC and carbon pricing. So what are the activities that the country actually wants to do and achieve with its own domestic resources or with climate finance, and which parts, which technologies or programs or measures it would like to realize with, on the Article 6 track. Then pipeline development, identification of programs. I also want to use this opportunity again to congratulate Dominica for having set up this, this vehicle that really guides the investment into their priorities. This is really important to tell the market also what the activities and what the programs are they would like to be realized under Article 6. Then we also still see, of course, no objection, validation, or authorization, these process steps that have to be trained, that have to be piloted, tested, and institutionalized, basically. And then accreditation of auditors, as well as what comes later, reporting, recording, tracking. These are important elements where we still see readiness needs. In the private sector, of course, we also see a lot of readiness needs and capacity gaps, such as being able to identify opportunities for green investments, for developing, filing applications, managing programs, but also replicating them and scaling them up. Also actually securing the upfront financing from investors, impact investors, financial institutions is important. And then again, validation and verification. We need the local knowledge in the countries to audit those programs. Now we still see quite a few needs and gaps in both the public and the private sector. And I actually want to end my presentation with these slides, a few success factors. So I think really success factors for readiness are in like 3 realms. One is engagement and leadership. So it's important that the host country is in the driver's seat and really based on the regular NDC review and update is able to point the market to what they want to do with which type of instrument. It's really important to also engage the private sector really early on and be really active here. Another readiness factor, another area I'd say is data, knowledge, and tools. And this is, I think, where the next presenters will follow up on. So really tools, methodological tools for the actual development and implementation of those types of programs. And then the third, I'd say, is partnerships. So partnerships for capacity buildings, partnerships for finance, also partnerships with the private sector, and certainly also with climate finance where it can make sense. So I think I'll leave it with that. I think my time-wise I'm running up and looking forward to the discussion and engaging with the panel later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ursula. And one needs to say that this click model is unique. And I'm wondering whether any country will emulate it, because I think it has been a very efficient way to mobilize international carbon market action. Now I would like to invite my colleague Juliana to introduce the International Initiative for Development of Article 6 methodology tools and to kickstart the second part of this event. Juliana, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Axel. And as has just been raised by Ursula, for Article 6 implementation, you also need respective methodologies against which the mitigation outcomes are determined against. And to make the link to the previous session as well, SIDS can make use of the host country prerogative to adjust the baseline as per their interest. So this requires a high-level simplified approaches given the limited resources and human capacities. And the International Initiative for Development of Article 6 methodology tools is an approach that works on developing an easy to use tools which can then facilitate the methodology transition from the previous international carbon markets to the new Paris carbon markets. In my presentation, I would like to dive a little bit deeper into the efforts by this initiative with the goal to really advance methodological work that is aligned with the Article 6 requirements. And the starting point of this initiative has really been the consideration that we have about 250 existing baseline and monitoring methodologies and above 30 tools under the Clean Development Mechanism. And they are applied in also many other carbon mechanisms worldwide. And so this is an important body of knowledge that cannot just be easily discarded or put aside. But actually this knowledge should be built up on now when we transition to the new carbon markets under the Paris Agreement. And for that purpose, the IIAMT in brief, as we call it, is developing tools that can be added to existing methodologies to basically facilitate this methodology transition. As I mentioned, the tools that the initiative develops aim to or are aligned with the new methodological requirements under Article 6. And the Paris Agreement, and specifically also the Glasgow decision from last year, introduces a set of new stringent principles and rules. So here on the left, you can see old principles that have already been applied under the Clean Development Mechanism and under joint implementation, so the Kyoto mechanisms, like, for example, take into account uncertainty, leakage, and relevant circumstances, be transparent, conservative, creditable, recognize suppressed demand, address reversals where applicable. And now we have new methodological requirements that go beyond those that have been established by the Kyoto mechanisms. Like, for example, encourage ambition over time, align with the long-term temperature target, contribute to reducing emission levels in the host party, and align with its NDC and its long-term low-emission development strategy, that the baseline is below business as usual, and that it takes into account policies and measures and contributes to the equitable sharing of mitigation benefits. So coming back to the IIAMT, it has been established in January of this year, really with the goal to provide a pragmatic but robust approach to the methodology transition and to make CDM methodologies fit for Article 6. And as I mentioned already, the goal is really to align approved CDM methodologies with these Article 6 requirements, and they are then crafted upon CDM methodologies to basically enable this rapid uptake of methodologies under Article 6. So to put it here visually, to basically prevent this valley of death of CDM methodologies. And the IIAMT is led by an international team of methodological experts. Two will also speak up after me. They will be joining us virtually. And what is important to mention is that the IIAMT is not or does not follow any interests like from project developers or governments, etc., but it's really an independent approach that seeks close cooperation with the supervisory body under Article 6.4, so the oversight body basically under the new carbon mechanism under Article 6. Just to quickly introduce the phases, the initiative has gone through a conceptualization phase in the first half of this year, and basically their draft concept notes have been developed, and then following this phase from April until next year in February is the tool development phase is currently taking place. I will dive a little bit deeper in 2 slides into where we are right now at the moment. But basically, we also seek inputs from stakeholders on a regular basis. And so far, 3 tools have been implemented, and draft tools, I have to say, and an NDC guidance. And then from next year onwards, there will also be a piloting phase. Yeah, here you can also again see the concrete outputs that have so far been created by the experts. The documents both operationalize principles that are enshrined in the Article 6.2 guidance and in the Article 6.4 rules, modalities and procedures, and adhere to both like shall and should requirements in the decision texts. It's important to mention that the tools are really standalone tools. For additionality determination, for baseline setting, MRV, and and also important to mention is here that it's for project and program level activities, so we do not cover sectoral or policy interventions. Another important thing is that the tools are really sector and technology agnostic. So this means activity-specific considerations are currently not taken into account. And then in the medium to long term, further refinement of the tools might be done, also to consider the differences when it comes to different project activity types. But yeah, currently we really focus on the high-level issues that focus on a wide range of activity types. And yeah, last but not least, I quickly wanted to mention that we currently, or basically today, are launching the public consultation of the draft tools. And I would also cordially invite everybody in this room to participate. We're really seeking a lot of stakeholder input until 16th of January. And yes, with this, over to you, Axel.
Thank you very much. And of course, I would really like to invite the carbon market community to comment strongly, because we really want this to be something that is relevant on a global level. With that, I would now invite our two expert inputs, and I would pass the floor to Randall virtually. So Randall, please speak up. I hope we can hear you.
Yes, hi, thanks. Can you hear me?
Perfect, we hear you absolutely well. Great.
Okay, and just wait, I think it's best for me to do the presentation from my end, isn't that right?
Yes, please try.
Okay, and I'm going to do that. So while I'm working on the technology, thank you very much to all the organizers for the opportunity to be here. It was also fascinating to hear about what Dominica is doing, so that was a real treat as well. So I only have a couple of slides, as you can see here, and I just want to touch on the additionality tool. Of course, as everybody in this room probably knows, there is already an additionality tool under the CDM. So I want to highlight a little bit about how this is actually different and incorporating what Juliana was saying. So, as with all the tools, the idea is how do we implement this new guidance? So in this case, how do we help activities across the Article 6 spectrum to demonstrate that they're additional? And we've tried to do that in a very kind of stepwise, tool-oriented approach, so you could actually take this guidance. And I should say, you could use this not just if the supervisory board eventually decides to consider this, but you could even use it for Article 6.2 cooperative activities, because it could provide some guidance. So as Juliana mentioned, we're building on lessons from the CDM. We're also trying to integrate what's already in the agreed text in the Article 6 rulebook. And I think the other stuff here is a repeat. So let me just say, so here are the main steps. And what I've tried to do is highlight where there's some shifts from the CDM additionality tool. So for example, prior consideration has been an issue for a number of years. But one thing that's different here is that this public notification needs to occur before the start of the activity, not within 6 months, not within 2 years, as you find in some places in the voluntary market. It needs to be happening in some way before the activity. And of course, this Article 6.4 mechanism doesn't have a way to do that yet. So there's an option here to do that simply through public notifications from the project proponents. Then regulatory additionality, or this is sometimes called regulatory surplus, also wasn't really explicit in the original additionality tool. It's very common in the voluntary carbon market, and it was kind of implicit in the way we considered alternatives to the project activity. But here we're trying to be very clear about saying you need to conclusively show that this activity is not mandated by any laws or regulations. And not only just existing ones, but one thing we realize that sometimes a country might pass a regulation, but it's only going to be actually rolled out, say, in 3 or 4 or 5 years. So that's what we mean when we say if there's a regulation that's been promulgated, but it isn't yet active, it's going to become active in 3 or 4 years. That should also be considered, because it is a commitment that the country has essentially made. And then the last thing is, instead of just saying, well, every project, you need to evaluate the financial additionality or the investment attractiveness. Instead, we try to say, well, let's first look at what are the risks here. So if you have an activity type where there's no other sources of revenue other than carbon revenues, you don't really need to do a detailed financial additionality. Now, that's kind of a waste of time. So there's first this screening of, what kind of overall level of risk might there be in this activity type, and then that shapes how you implement this financial additionality testing. And there's a thought that if it's kind of on the borderline, one option is simply to limit the crediting period, even if you do allow it. And there, of course, are activities where you find they're not 100%. Sorry, what am I trying to say? There's a little bit of overlap in the financial assessment results between the project activity and what we think the baseline activity would be. So we're trying to address that. So these get rolled out in the tool in, as I mentioned, steps, and it's very clear these are all mandatory. The only thing that's not mandatory is, again, if the risk evaluation shows that there's very little financial additionality risk for a particular activity type, but if that's there, then that's mandatory as well. There's also guidance in here on positive lists. I think there's some really good experience now across international carbon markets about what kind of process do you need, what kind of expert input, what kind of public input would you need, how often should you update these. So we tried to crystallize some of that, and as well as guidance on crediting period length. Finally, as most of the carbon market experts will know in here, there was never any reconsideration of additionality at crediting period renewal in the past, and generally we think that does make sense. But now, of course, we have lots of programmatic activities where you actually have an ongoing set of investments. It's not just a one-off investment in a very large wind farm, for example, at the beginning of the project. If there's ongoing investment, then it may be important to revisit some of these financial issues even at that renewal, and you can see the tool for how we do that. So I'll stop there, and hopefully that gives you enough of an overview, and I'll turn it over to Martha to talk about other technical issues.
Thank you, Randall. So, Martha, do we have you?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm
Perfect,
just trying
we
to
hear
share my
you.
screen. Can you hear me now?
Perfectly, yes.
Okay, good. I'm trying to share my screen.
Yes, we see it.
Okay, cool. 1 minute. I didn't switch on my video. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be presenting at this side event. My name is Martha Ntabadde. I'm based in Uganda, and I've been part of the IIAMT initiative. And I present the work on the two tools, that is the baseline tool and the MRV tool. Juliana has done a very good job of providing the relevant introduction to this. So we start off with the baseline tool. So basically, this is meant to provide a robust approach to baseline determination for Article 6 related activities under the Paris Agreement. Robust in the sense that it is practical, like it can be applied by just about anyone, and it can be applied in different scenarios. Yeah. So this has been broken down in various steps, which we'll go through as quickly as possible because we don't have a lot of time. So we start off with an eligibility criteria. This is meant to check if the activity is aligned with the long-term Paris Agreement goal, yeah, and that the particular activity does not lead to a lock-in of emissions reductions. And of course, under this, the different things we can tick off, for example, that the activity does not appear on any positive list that has been provided either by the supervisory body for Article 6.4 or by the host country, yeah? And then, of course, to check that the particular activity does not lead to a lock-in in emissions reductions, and also check that it is economically and environmentally sound, yeah? And then step 1, which is mandatory, we check the appropriateness of performance benchmarking for the sector and subsectors targeted for the proposed activity. I think this will be clear when you look at the next slide, which shows a flow diagram to show the process we go through in determining this. So there's an indicative prioritization for the first two options, that is the best available technology, and then ambitious benchmarking. But this can only be used if you have some sort of homogeneity in the output, yeah? That is whether it is a good or a service that the particular activity is producing. Now, if there's homogeneity and best available technology has been defined, then we recommend it is best to use the BAT option, that is the best available technology. And if it hasn't been identified, then ambitious benchmarking approach becomes the best option. And then the third option appears if you don't have, as you'll see, the other conditions, yeah? So after determining if it is appropriate to use benchmarking or not, then you go on to select the baseline approach, whether it is best available technology, ambitious benchmark approach, or using actual historical emission adjusted downward, yeah? Using what we call a Paris goal coefficient, yeah? And then the third one is to assess, as we have had in the terms that Juliana presented earlier, we talk about alignment to the NDC, yeah? So we go on further to assess the activity level baseline that has been determined in step 2 above, and then see if it's aligned with the NDC and conditional targets, whether it's defined for the sector, and if it's defined at a national level, then that has to be scaled down so that we can see how it compares with the activity that you're looking at, yeah? And so if what has been set in step 2 is higher than what we get when we align with the NDC target, then the NDC sector-wide target has to be used. And if it's already lower, then we just choose what has been determined under step 2. And then, of course, there's got to be regular updates of the baseline, which should be aligned with the NDC periods. So the end of each NDC cycle, the baseline has to be reviewed to see that it's still in line, and then that is updated accordingly. And then the tool also leaves an option. What if a project activity or a host country wants to set a baseline that is more stringent than the steps that are provided in this particular tool, yeah? So it allows for that option. Maybe the country would be more interested in allowing to have more emissions available towards fulfilling its NDC targets rather than what is being sold, yeah? So that option is also there, but it is optional, yeah, if a host country or activity needs to look at that option. So this gives a summary of what I've already gone through. First is the precondition, the mandatory pre-step, checking the eligibility, alignment to the long-term Paris goal. And then we check the suitability of using performance benchmarking for the particular activity. If it is found to be suitable, then we find out has best available technology been defined for that particular sector. If yes, then we use option 1. If not, then we use ambitious benchmarking. And then if not, then we use option 3. And these are downward adjusted based on a Paris goal coefficient. And then this is also further adjusted according to the national or sector reference scenarios in reference to the emissions level found to be lower than the activity level baseline. And then we have talked about updating of the baseline at the end of each NDC cycle, yeah? And this particular slide shows guidelines on how we can select which of the 3 options we can use for a particular activity. If the sector is homogeneous, you have 2 options, either option 1 or 2. If a best available technology has been defined, then use option 1. If not, then option 2. However, we have those sectors that are characterized, for example, by strongly varying circumstances, or the data is not homogeneous, or the sector is complex with a multitude of products that are being offered and they're not homogeneous, yeah? So that is more suitable for using option 3, that is using a historical emission, yeah? Now, for the MRV tool, you'll see, based on what Randall has presented and what has been presented just right now for the baseline 2, that the approach we used for the MRV tool is slightly different, yeah? The structure is different from the other tools. So this particular tool is meant to provide a guidance on an MRV framework for Article 6 activities. Now, we have not sought to reinvent the wheel, so it's mostly based on existing CDM monitoring methodologies, yeah, approaches, but these are improved using the rules and principles that are enshrined in the Article 6.2 guidance, the rules, modalities, and procedures for Article 6.4, and then the modalities, procedures, and guidelines for the enhanced transparency framework. And of course, because we're not reinventing the wheel, we know that the guidelines for MRV and the CDM and JI were defined under the Marrakesh Accord. So we still refer to that, yeah? So now looking at these, we come up with 3 different sections in the tool. The first one covers definitions that we consider relevant to be able to also understand the rationale behind what you're doing in the tool. And then we divide the elements into 2 elements. There are those which were considered, we think were considered relatively well in the existing CDM elements. Things like accuracy, completeness, consistency, when you talk about materiality, and the use of the most current global warming potentials for the various elements, and then as well as quality assurance. However, there are those elements which are completely new, and this has been the focus of this tool to try and elaborate on this, yeah? So these include monitoring of all relevant policies, and then you have the monitoring of reversals, which is also a new component. And then we have a sustainable development tool, but maybe to emphasize the fact that this was thought to need 2 components. That is a sustainable development tool, and then what we call a safeguards tool. So because there's already work that is underway by the supervisory body to develop a sustainable development assessment tool, our focus has been on developing some sort of safeguards tool, yeah, to kind of assess the safeguard component. And then, of course, the 4th component is on conservativeness and how it interplays with accuracy, yeah, especially for cases where you have prohibitive costs for achieving a high accuracy, and we may have to use conservativeness to ensure that emissions are not overestimated. So the first component that is new is conservativeness, so that under normal circumstances, as provided by the principles described earlier, the developer ought to strive to achieve the highest accuracy that is possible, yeah? However, in case of prohibitive costs, then we can aim to use conservativeness. So when the costs are prohibitive, then the project developer can aim to use a less accurate methodology, provided conservativeness is guaranteed, so that this ensures that emissions are not...
Sorry, Martha, to intervene here, but I think we need to wrap up shortly.
Okay, sure. And then we have the monitoring of policies, and then you have the monitoring of reversals with different steps on how to achieve this sort of assessment. And then we also have the sustainable development tool, which focuses on safeguards assessment, where we carry out the screening to assess is safeguards monitoring actually are we expecting like significant environmental socioeconomic impacts? And if we are, then we go on to scope what sort of impacts are expected. And then we assess these based on the IFC performance standards on social and environmental sustainability. And then this is formulated in an environmental impact statement. Yeah. So that in a nutshell is a summary of the steps that you take in the MRV tool. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Martha. So with that, we are close to the end of our event. Still, I would like to invite a few questions from the audience, if there are
Anyone who would like to come in? Can we move the microphone so I see Luan and Han? Maybe you can bring up your questions together. Can we get the mic? Here.
Yeah, thank you very much for a very interesting event. And I would like to ask the
Please
Ursula
name
from
and
Click.
institution, sorry,
Yeah.
everyone can recognize.
Okay, my name is Luan. I'm from the Energy and Environment Consultancy George Stock Company in Vietnam. And I would like to ask the question for Click representative about the criteria that why you exclude the forestry project from your requirements.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. So there are a few requirements in addition to the positive requirements such as contribution to sustainable development and environmental integrity that derive from the Swiss national framework. So the Swiss regulatory has actually decided that forestry, due to the risks of permanence that are just difficult to guarantee internationally or abroad, that these types of activity would be excluded. However, there are just really a few kind of no-go areas. Apart from that, we are technology open. We really invite ideas and proposals, and we're always happy to take a look and provide timely feedback. And yeah, this is one of the areas we can't go, but mostly we have a lot of other sectors that we can touch upon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just mention Martha should stop sharing her screen, I think, for the other participants online. I think her screen is still shared, but it's not showing a presentation.
Okay, thanks Randall for launching this issue. We don't see it here on site, so Martha, if you could do that, please. Han?
Yeah, I have a very quick question. I'm Hạnh from VNEC, also Vietnam. I have the question about the tool we need apply also to the CDM register project that will be transferred under Article 6.4 or not? Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, can you repeat the question? It was about...
Yeah, the tools that you introduce in it also apply to the CDM register project that will be eligible to that will be considered to transfer under Article 6.4 or not? Yeah.
Yeah, I just quickly want to highlight that as of now, the tools we develop are really, technology agnostic, as I mentioned on one of my slides. So it's not that we go in there and say right now, so this methodology would be transferable to Article 6.4 because it complies with the requirements. I think ideally, at one point, the supervisory body takes a decision on what sort of methodologies could transition to the Article 6.4 mechanism. And then, ideally, the Article 6 tools we are developing could then be added up on these methodologies where the supervisory body says, yes, these are, free to transition because they comply with the requirements, specifically also additionality would still be additional under Article 6.4 and can therefore transition.
Thanks, Julia.
Thank you very much. Lars Kvele, Blue Carbon Projects, developer of blue carbon projects in the Caribbean. First of all, thanks to all the speakers. It's a great panel. I have tons of questions. I also know some of you have been up there all day, so I'll moderate myself to at least just do to one. And it's actually for Ramiro, if he's still online. One of the projects we are supporting is a regenerative agriculture project on the west coast of Dominica by the syndicate. And I'm curious if that type of project would benefit around food resiliency, biodiversity, and climate as well. Is that eligible for the fund? Is the fund up and running? Can you apply? And obviously it could be either grant or potential investment as well. Thank you.
Well, a couple of questions in one there. Would it be eligible within the theory of change and the log frame that it's indicative, obviously, and I say this because it probably should be clarified that during the fundraising rounds that would happen in one of these types of funds, the LPs, especially the ones that are putting on a lot of cash, tend to get their way and tend to get some of those log frames changed and based on their mandate, right? So it's not written in stone, and I think this type of discussion over here with you is very important, because it essentially allows us to determine more of what the demand for this financing is. So the fund, to answer your second question, the fund is not up and running. It would be in a fundraising stage after the government procures the general partner. Would it be eligible? I think so. In fact, the more projects that would happen from the ground up, from communities, from organized cooperatives, are the kinds of projects that we see that this fund would be interested in funding. Thanks.
Thanks, Ramiro. The last question, please, over here.
John Lewis, Terra Global Capital, allied with this NGO that I've been with for a long time. And we have another spin-off in regenerative agriculture. Anyway, that's who I am. I had a forestry question, I had a regenerative agriculture question that have been answered. But I'm really struck by Martha's presentation at how comprehensively it looks at a history that I've been living with since I stumbled into COP6 as a USA Director of Agriculture way back then, and then after retirement doing this ever since. And I'm wondering if this comparative analysis of the lessons learned since the CDM, coming right back up to the present, is available, should be available, shouldn't be available. It's something that every high school kid should read if those conclusions and the methodology developed out of it are anchored in these, what we used to call lessons learned.
Anyone wants to comment on this? More a comment than a question? I'm not seeing that. So before closing, I would just say that Click Foundation is sponsoring a reception. You see there is some liquid stuff in the back of the room. So I invite you to stay on and share your questions, discuss with us. I think there is a lot that can be discussed. And with that, I would like to formally close the event, thank all the presenters, wish Dominica good luck with the financing of their integrated program, and thank everyone, also virtual presenters, for being with us at this late hour. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alex, and thanks, Raquel. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Enjoy. Sorry to miss the drinks afterwards.